My name's Colby Wexler, and I remember the exact moment I realized my marriage had ended, not during a fight, not after a discovery, but somewhere between a lukewarm casserole and a folded linen napkin on my lap. It was a rainy Thursday in October, the kind of drizzle that leaves the world looking blurry through the window, like everything's just slightly out of focus. We were sitting at her parents' long oak table in Northfield, Minnesota. Candlelight flickered across polished plates, and the room was heavy with the scent of rosemary chicken and perfume that reminded me of someone I used to know. I didn't want to be there. I never did. Her family was always polite, always too kind, the kind that smiled a little too wide and asked questions that felt like traps. But I went because I was supposed to, because Nora, my wife of 6 years, had said it would mean a lot to my mom. So I shaved, buttoned my least wrinkled shirt, and played the role of the quietly dependable husband, which I'd gotten too good at. Dinner began like usual. Her dad, Leonard, made a comment about property taxes. Her mom, Glenna, shared a story from her knitting club that no one really listened to. I kept glancing across the table at Nora, who looked oddly glowing that night. Too glowing. She wore a silk dress I'd never seen before, one with a neckline she'd usually reserve for nights we didn't talk to anyone else. Then came the comment, the one that flipped my entire life sideways. Her younger sister, Mallory, was talking about moving in with her boyfriend, some guy named Kip who, according to Glenna, looked like a mechanic but not in a good way. Everyone was laughing, throwing out bits of advice and judgment, and that's when Nora leaned forward, lifted her wine glass, and said with a smirk, "Just make sure you get your backup plan in place, someone you actually want to be with when things get boring." I blinked. There was a pause, a laugh or two, but something inside me dropped. Her mom said, "Nora," and mock scandal, but Nora didn't even look embarrassed. She just sipped her wine like it was the most natural thing in the world. Nobody else caught it, but I did. I knew. Because 2 nights ago, she told me she loved how simple and comfortable our life was. Because a week ago, she came home smelling like someone else's cologne. Because last month, I found a hotel room key in the pocket of a jacket she hadn't worn since a team conference in Denver. And now, here she was, mocking the idea of commitment in front of her entire family, while looking directly at me. I didn't say a word. I didn't throw the glass or accuse her. I just folded the napkin I hadn't even used yet, set it gently on the table, and stood up. No one noticed at first, not until I was halfway to the door. Then I heard her voice, light and amused. "Colby, where are you going?" I didn't answer. I didn't look back. I walked out into the cold rain, pulled my coat tighter, and kept walking. I didn't take the car. I didn't have a destination. All I knew was that something inside me had just died, and for once, I had enough self-respect to bury it properly. I didn't realize how far I'd walked until my phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't check it. I knew who it was, Nora, or maybe her mother trying to smooth things over with that eerily calm tone she always used, like every emotional fire could be put out with herbal tea and a quote from the Bible. But I wasn't in the mood to be extinguished. I was burning, and for once, I wanted the fire to grow. I ended up at a little diner I hadn't been to since college. A place called Earl's, with sticky vinyl booths and a jukebox that still played songs older than anyone inside. I sat down, drenched, coat dripping onto the cracked linoleum floor. The waitress didn't ask questions. She just brought me black coffee and gave me a sad smile. That simple kindness, the kind that doesn't ask for anything, hit harder than I expected. I stared into the mug like it might show me a way out. I didn't want to admit it, not even to myself, but I wasn't just heartbroken. I was humiliated. I felt like the punchline to a joke that had been told behind my back for years. It wasn't just the phrase she said at dinner. It was how easily she said it. Like she'd rehearsed it. Like it wasn't even about Mallory, like it was about us. I started thinking back. Not to the good times. Those have become harder to reach lately. I started thinking about all the moments I brushed things off, the times she came home late with vague stories, the weekend she insisted on taking a solo spa retreat, even though we had plans with my sister's kids. The growing distance. The constant phone tilted away from me posture. The way she flinched when I touched her back in bed, pretending she was just too tired to cuddle. A guy knows. Even the soft ones like me. The ones who don't yell, don't snoop through purses, don't demand passwords. We know. We just lie to ourselves longer than we should. And then, right in the middle of my self-pity spiral, I remembered something small. Something strange. A name I heard once, Garrett. She mentioned him months ago. Garrett in marketing who always overshares. That's how she put it. Back then I didn't think much of it. But now, sitting in that booth, I remembered she'd gone silent when I casually asked how Garrett was doing. She changed the subject, brushed it off. So I pulled out my phone. I didn't check Nora's messages. I opened LinkedIn, typed Garrett plus her company. First result, Garrett O'Neill, marketing director, age 39. Divorced. No kids. And from his profile photo, I could see exactly the type of man Nora would have gone for. Tan, smiling, the kind of jawline that gets described in commercials. A man who looked like he always knew the right moment to touch someone's arm and make them feel wanted. Suddenly, her glowing energy at dinner made more sense. Her new dress. The offhand joke. The way she didn't even flinch when I stood up and walked away. She wasn't scared of me leaving. She was already emotionally gone. Probably had been for a while. And Garrett? He wasn't just a coworker. He was the reason her eyes never really focused on me when I spoke. He was the silence in our kitchen. The conference calls that ran too late. The extra cologne in her car. The realization wasn't explosive. It wasn't cinematic. It was quiet, like stepping into a room and realizing all the furniture is gone. I sat in that booth until the coffee went cold, until the diner started closing. And when I walked out, my coat heavy with rain and regret, I wasn't thinking about revenge or confrontation. I wasn't even angry. I was just empty. But even emptiness has its uses. Because from that emptiness, I decided something important. I wasn't going to fight for someone who treated me like an old shoe they only wore when it was convenient. I was done trying to guess what I did wrong in a game she never told me I was playing. What I didn't know, what would come next, would hit even harder. But at the time, I thought the worst was already behind me. I was wrong. The walk back wasn't heroic. It wasn't romantic either. It was pathetic, cold, and aimless. I wasn't heading home. I was heading to the place where I used to feel safe. Where my clothes still hung neatly in the closet I shared with a woman I no longer recognized. The truth was, I didn't even know what I planned to do once I got there. I just knew I wasn't ready to sleep on a diner bench in wet clothes with half a plan and a dying phone battery. When I arrived, the porch light was still on. She always left it on for me. There was something sickening about that small gesture, still functioning like everything was normal. As if I was just late coming home from the gym or drinks with coworkers. As if she hadn't poured acid into our marriage with one smug sentence and a wine glass raised like a toast to betrayal. I opened the front door quietly. It wasn't locked. Of course it wasn't. We lived in a neighborhood where people left casseroles on porches and borrowed rakes from each other. The living room was still. Her heels were by the stairs. That new pair she bought last week. The ones she said were for presentation days. I stood in the dark entryway, soaked and silent, staring at my own house like it belonged to a stranger. I didn't call out. I didn't stomp around or slam doors. I just listened. Upstairs, I could hear her voice faintly. She was on the phone. Her laugh, that soft, knowing one she used when she thought she was being clever, floated down the hallway. I tiptoed in farther. Not out of fear. Out of disbelief. I needed to hear it for myself. To confirm what I already knew in my gut but hadn't had the nerve to face. She was saying something about Saturday. About keeping it simple and no need to book anything too fancy. Then, very clearly, she said, Colby will be out for most of the day. You know how predictable he is. My knees went cold. Not from the rain. From the realization that I had become part of someone else's logistics. I wasn't a husband. I was a time slot. A gap in her calendar. A convenient blind spot in the life she was living behind my back. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I didn't need names or details. I didn't need to scroll through her phone or hire someone. I'd been humiliated enough. I walked back down the hallway, pulled off my coat, and went straight to the guest room. I didn't go to our bedroom. That room was a crime scene to me now, even if no physical evidence remained. I lay on the guest bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me. The sheets smelled like fabric softener and lies. My mind was screaming, but my body was too tired to move. I'd been betrayed, mocked in front of her entire family, and now quietly erased from her private plans. I wanted to cry. Not because I loved her, that love had been dying in pieces for a while, but because I built my life around the idea of us. Around the belief that stability was enough, that being loyal, kind, and dependable would keep someone's heart in the right place. But hearts don't respond to logic. They respond to attention, to novelty, to people who challenge them, make them feel desired, risky, new. And I was safe, steady, a good man with no sharp edges. The kind of man women say they want. Until someone like Garrett walks in and makes them forget every reason they ever said, I do. I must have fallen asleep for a while because when I opened my eyes, the sky outside was pale with morning light. I could hear her in the kitchen, humming like nothing had happened. Like her world wasn't ash and mine wasn't rubble. She hadn't even come to check on me. Hadn't knocked, hadn't sent a text. And that, I think, was the final cut. Not the phrase at dinner. Not the phone call. But the quiet lack of concern. The unbothered detachment of a woman who had already erased me from her heart. I stood up, left the room, walked past the kitchen without a word. She looked up, startled, probably surprised I hadn't just left in the night. Morning, she said, her voice chipper. You okay? I didn't answer. I opened the hallway closet, pulled out a duffel bag, and began packing. Not in a rage. Not with slam drawers. Just calmly, methodically, like someone finishing a chore. She followed me to the doorway and leaned there, arms crossed. Seriously? Are we really doing this? She asked, tilting her head. I zipped the bag shut and looked at her for the first time that morning. No, I said flatly. You already did it. And I walked past her. I didn't slam the door when I left. I didn't shout or throw anything. The bag in my hand was embarrassingly light, just a few shirts, a pair of jeans, my toothbrush. It wasn't the kind of bag you pack when you're moving out forever. But somewhere deep down, I already knew I wasn't coming back. The front steps creaked under my weight as I walked to my car parked at the curb. I got in, tossed the bag into the passenger seat, and stared at the steering wheel for a long moment, feeling like the world's biggest fool. Nora didn't follow me outside. She didn't call after me. She didn't apologize. She simply let the door swing quietly shut behind her, like closing a book she was finished reading. I sat there until my fingers hurt from clenching the wheel. I wasn't even angry at her anymore. I was angry at myself. Angry that I ignored the signs for so long. Angry that I thought loyalty was enough to anchor someone who wanted to drift. Angry that I was so predictable even she used it against me in her conversations with someone else. I drove with no real plan, taking back roads out of town just to keep moving. It was strange how quickly home became a place I couldn't stomach returning to. Every street sign felt foreign, like I was a tourist in my own life. Somewhere near the county line, I pulled over at a dusty old gas station that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. I grabbed a coffee that tasted like burnt plastic and leaned against my car, wondering what the hell I was supposed to do next. I had friends. Sure. But not the kind you crash with at 33 because your wife turned out to be a stranger. Most of my buddies were married too, with kids, mortgages, responsibilities. I could already picture their polite discomfort, the forced offers of their couches, the quiet judgment they wouldn't even realize they were giving off. I didn't want their pity. I didn't want anyone's pity. I thumbed through my phone mindlessly, ignoring the handful of texts from Nora. Short, emotionless bursts like, "Can we talk?" and "Come home." The kind of messages you send when you're more worried about appearances than actual regret. None of them asked if I was okay. None of them said, "I'm sorry." It was damage control, nothing more. I almost called my brother, Tanner. He lived 2 states over, worked construction, always had a spare room. But even as my thumb hovered over his name, I hesitated. I knew what he'd say. Knew he'd go into Big Brother mode, talking about how I should have left months ago, how I deserved better. And he wouldn't be wrong. But I wasn't ready to hear that yet. Not while the wound was still raw and bleeding. Instead, I drove to a motel about 40 minutes outside of town. One of those places with flickering neon signs that you'd normally avoid unless you had no better options. The clerk barely looked up when I handed over my credit card. The room smelled like bleach and old cigarette smoke, but it had a bed, a shower, and most importantly, silence. I dropped my bag by the door and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. Somewhere in another life, in another version of my marriage, I might have fought harder. I might have demanded explanations, cried, begged, tried to fix it. But sitting there in that cheap motel room, I finally accepted something brutal and necessary. You can't fix something that doesn't want to be fixed. You can't save what wants to sink. And Nora? She had already let herself drown long before I noticed we were surrounded by water. I didn't cry that night. I thought I would. But there was nothing left. Just a quiet, exhausted numbness, like a battery drained to zero. I flipped on the old television, letting the noise fill the space, and lay back on the bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere in the background, a late-night talk show host was cracking jokes I couldn't hear over the roar inside my own mind. I had no plan, no roadmap, No clue how to rebuild a life that had been silently hollowed out for years without my even realizing it. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to be a man who begged to stay in a place he was no longer welcome. I wasn't going to be the guy she kept around like an old comfort blanket until someone shinier and newer came along. I was done being invisible. Morning would come, and with it, choices I wasn't ready to face. But for now, in that dim, flickering room with peeling wallpaper and a sagging mattress, I made my first real decision in a long time. I was going to start over. Without her. The next morning hit me like a punch to the ribs. Not because of anything dramatic, but because of how completely ordinary it felt. The weak motel sunlight pushed through the stained curtains, and for a brief second, I forgot where I was. I reached across the bed instinctively, half expecting to find Nora there, curled up, stealing the covers the way she always used to. My hand hit nothing but the cool, empty mattress. And that emptiness, that small, stupid moment, hurt more than any screaming match or betrayal ever could. I lay there staring at the water-stained ceiling, listening to the muffled sound of traffic on the highway, and thought about how my life had shrunk overnight. No house, no wife, no future vacations we used to talk about and never book. No traditions we pretended to care about. Just a 33-year-old man with a duffel bag, a dead phone battery, and the realization that everything he'd invested years into had been quietly draining away long before he noticed. I dragged myself up and took a shower in the tiny, grimy bathroom. The mirror was cracked in the corner, and somehow, that felt appropriate. I barely recognized the man staring back at me. I looked older than I remembered, not in the way wrinkles or gray hairs age you, but in the way sadness can weigh down your entire posture until you feel like you're carrying twice your real age on your back. While I charged my phone, I sat on the edge of the bed scrolling mindlessly, avoiding the texts piling up from Nora. Most of them were shallow and clinical. Can we talk? Where are you? You're being dramatic. That last one stung more than it should have. Being dramatic. As if standing up and walking away from a betrayal was some kind of theater performance. As if being gutted by the person you trusted most was just a minor inconvenience. I wanted her to apologize. I wanted her to say it had been a mistake, that she realized what she was losing. I wanted some grand gesture, some desperate attempt to fix what she'd broken. But deep down, I knew it wasn't coming. People don't apologize for things they never truly valued in the first place. They don't fight to keep what they never intended to protect. And waiting for that apology would only keep me trapped in a version of my life that had already ended. So I made a decision. A real one this time. I wasn't going to ghost her. I wasn't going to sink into petty revenge or social media tantrums. I was going to confront it cleanly. Finally. On my terms. Not for closure. I knew by now that closure is a story you have to write for yourself, but because leaving things unfinished would chain me to her forever in ways neither of us deserved. I packed my few things back into the duffel, checked out of the motel without making eye contact with the bored clerk, and drove straight toward the one place I never thought I'd willingly return to, our house. I practiced what I would say on the way there, rehearsed it in my head, kept it simple. No accusations, no dramatic ultimatums, just the truth, stripped of all the fantasies and excuses I'd built around it. When I pulled into the driveway, her car was there. The porch light was still on even though it was midday, casting a weird, useless glow on the front steps. I stood there for a moment, my key heavy in my hand, before finally pushing the door open and stepping inside. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, looking up with a mixture of surprise and mild annoyance when she saw me. Like I was an unexpected delivery she hadn't ordered. She opened her mouth to say something. Probably something condescending, probably some half-baked excuse, but I held up my hand to stop her. No speeches, Nora. Just listen for once, I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. She sat back, arms crossed, defensive already. I wasn't here to argue. I wasn't here to fight. I was here to say what needed to be said so I could walk away without leaving pieces of myself behind. You and we were over a long time ago, I said. I just didn't want to admit it. You found someone who made you feel new again. I get it. It hurts like hell, but I get it. What I don't get, and what I can't forgive, is the way you made me feel invisible. Like my loyalty was some boring background noise you could mute whenever you wanted. She shifted uncomfortably, but I didn't let her interrupt. I deserved better than that, I said, my throat tightening. And maybe you did too. Maybe we both settled for something less than we needed because it was easy, because it was safe. But I'm done mistaking convenience for love. I set my key on the coffee table between us. A simple gesture, but it felt like placing the final nail in the coffin of whatever we used to be. Take care of yourself, Nora, I said quietly. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. And then I turned and walked out. She didn't follow me. Not this time. And for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't wish she would. I didn't have a plan when I drove away from that house for the last time. No heroic soundtrack playing. No sudden sense of freedom crashing over me. Just a deep, gnawing emptiness that sat in the pit of my stomach like a stone. I left everything behind. Furniture, wedding photos, the stupid throw blankets she loved to buy on impulse, because none of it felt like it belonged to me anymore. None of it ever really did. It was all part of the world she curated, a museum exhibit of a marriage that had died quietly somewhere between broken promises and polite conversations. I checked into another motel across town, slightly less grimy than the first one, but still a far cry from the life I had built with her. I laid on the stiff mattress that night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what the hell came next. In movies, people have grand reinventions, new cities, dream jobs, passionate affairs. But real life isn't like that. Real life is cold coffee in the morning and wondering if you should call your insurance company to change your address. It's lonely dinners at chain restaurants where you pretend the waiter's fake cheerfulness fills some of the silence. It's realizing you don't even know what you like anymore because you spent years molding yourself into someone else's idea of good enough. The next few days blurred into each other. I filed paperwork. I canceled joint accounts. I signed things I didn't bother reading because at that point, what difference did it make? Nora didn't fight me on anything. If anything, she seemed relieved to untangle herself from the life we'd built. Another knife twist I wasn't prepared for. No dramatic pleas. No teary-eyed confessions. Just cold, administrative efficiency, like we were closing a business deal instead of ending a marriage. One evening, a few days after everything was finalized, I found myself sitting in a small diner outside town. One of those places that hadn't changed its menu since the Reagan administration. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a name tag that said Lou, brought me a plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes without judgment. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was performing. I didn't have to pretend I was okay. I didn't have to smile through the ache in my chest. I could just sit there, miserable and broken, and nobody cared. And weirdly, that was comforting. After a while, Lou came by to refill my coffee, and without thinking, I asked, "How do you start over when you don't even know who you are anymore?" She didn't laugh. She didn't give me some cheesy Hallmark card answer. She just shrugged and said, "One boring, hard, stupid day at a time." It wasn't profound, but it was real, and real was more than I'd had in months. That night, back at the motel, I pulled out a notepad from my bag, a leftover from the office supplies Nora always insisted we keep, and started making a list. Not a list of goals or resolutions or grand dreams. Just a list of small things I remembered liking before everything got so damn complicated. Playing guitar, hiking in the woods, watching old westerns on Sunday mornings, cooking breakfast foods at midnight. Dumb things, little things, but they were mine. Pieces of myself I had let slip away without even noticing. The next morning, I drove to a pawn shop and bought a beat-up acoustic guitar for $60. It was scratched and slightly out of tune, but when I strummed it in the parking lot, something inside me stirred for the first time in what felt like years. It wasn't joy. It wasn't even hope. It was something smaller, quieter, a tiny ember of something that might, someday, become life again. I still had a long way to go. I knew that. I was broke, emotionally gutted, and still waking up some mornings reaching for a woman who wasn't there and hadn't been there for a long time. But Lou was right. Starting over isn't a movie montage. It's a series of boring, hard, stupid days. It's brushing your teeth even when you don't want to. It's applying for crappy jobs when you feel like you're worth nothing. It's playing 3 ugly chords on a secondhand guitar in a motel parking lot because doing something, anything, feels better than sitting in silence waiting to rot. I wasn't healed. Not even close. But for the first time since that night at her parents' dinner table, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely lost. And sometimes, that's enough to keep going. A week after walking out of the life I thought I wanted, I found myself sitting on a bench at a tiny, overlooked park in the middle of nowhere. It was the kind of park that didn't have fancy landscaping or playgrounds, just a few sagging picnic tables, a creaky swing set, and a small pond with algae blooming across its surface. It was a gray morning, the kind where the sky hangs low and heavy, but somehow, it suited my mood perfectly. I didn't need sunshine. I didn't need false hope. I just needed a place to sit with my thoughts without anyone trying to tell me it was going to be okay. Because honestly, I wasn't sure it ever would be. You always hear people say you have to find yourself after a breakup. Like there's some magical version of you hidden under all the wreckage, just waiting to be discovered. But sitting there on that splintered bench, I realized something nobody ever tells you. You don't find yourself. You have to rebuild yourself, piece by piece, out of the ruins. And some of those pieces you thought were essential, they don't fit anymore. Some of them never did. I watched a couple of geese paddling clumsily across the pond, honking at each other like old married couples bickering over nothing. It made me chuckle, despite myself. I thought about Nora, about how easily she had slipped into someone else's life, leaving me behind like an old coat she didn't want to wear anymore. I thought about all the years I spent thinking if I just tried harder, loved better, stayed more patient, she would eventually notice me again. But love isn't a prize you earn by suffering quietly. It's either freely given, or it's not love at all. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and for a moment, I considered ignoring it like I had all the others. But some stubborn part of me, the part that still wanted to face things head-on instead of hiding, made me check it. It wasn't Nora. It was Tanner, my brother. A simple text. "Hey man, heard about Nora. You okay?" I stared at it for a long time. I could have lied. Could have said I was fine, that I was moving on, that it didn't hurt as bad as it did. But for once, I decided not to pretend. "Not really. But I'm working on it." I texted back. He replied almost immediately. "Come stay with us for a while. Cassie's making meatloaf tonight. You need family, man." I almost laughed out loud sitting there on that bench. Meatloaf. That was his grand gesture of salvation. But weirdly, it sounded perfect. Warm, messy, real. Everything my life had been missing for far too long. I texted back a simple "be there by dinner," stood up, and stretched, feeling the stiffness in my back from too many nights on cheap motel mattresses. As I walked back to my car, I realized something important. Healing doesn't start when you feel strong. It starts when you finally admit you're broken, and you let someone care anyway. The drive to Tanner's place took a few hours, long enough for me to think, really think, about everything I had left behind. And strangely, I didn't feel regret. I didn't miss Nora's cold smiles or her distracted hugs. I didn't miss the way I always had to walk on eggshells, afraid that being too boring or too emotional or too anything would push her further away. I missed the idea of her, the fantasy of the life I thought we were building, but not the reality. And for the first time, that felt like progress. When I pulled up to Tanner's modest house, a cozy place with a porch swing and a yard that needed mowing, he was already outside waiting for me, holding 2 beers and wearing the same stupid grin he'd had since we were kids. Cassie, his wife, waved from the front door, shouting something about getting in here before the casserole burns. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a fresh start with palm trees and beachfront views. It was just family. Imperfect, loud, real. And for a guy who had spent years feeling invisible in his own home, being seen, really seen, by someone who gave a damn was the rarest, richest feeling in the world. That night, over plates piled high with meatloaf and mashed potatoes, listening to my nephew bang on a toy drum set in the living room, I laughed. Really laughed. The kind of laugh that shakes something loose inside you, that reminds you there's still life worth living even after everything you thought you needed crumbles to dust. I wasn't healed yet. I wasn't whole. But sitting there, surrounded by people who didn't expect me to be anything more than what I was, broken, tired, messy, I realized maybe I didn't have to be healed to start living again. Maybe surviving was enough for now. And maybe, just maybe, the best parts of my story were still unwritten. The following weeks at Tanner's place passed in a way I hadn't felt life move in years, naturally. No pressure, no pretending. Just small moments of ordinary living that stitched themselves together like pieces of a patchwork quilt. Some mornings I'd wake early, walk to the end of their gravel driveway with a cup of bad coffee, and watch the sun rise over fields that smelled like rain and new beginnings. Other days I'd help Tanner fix the broken fence out back, laughing at how neither of us had any real idea what we were doing. It wasn't exciting. It wasn't glamorous. But it was real. And after everything I'd been through with Nora, the lies, the loneliness, the hollow promises, real was exactly what I needed. One afternoon, while Cassie wrangled the kids inside, Tanner and I sat on the porch drinking beers and throwing a battered football back and forth like we were teenagers again. He asked about Nora once, just once, and when I shook my head, he didn't push. Instead, he said something I hadn't expected to hear. "You know, Colby," he said, pausing with the ball in his hands, "maybe you didn't lose something. Maybe you just made room for something better." It sounded like one of those cheesy Pinterest quotes. But sitting there, sweaty, laughing, a little broken but still standing, I realized he was right. I hadn't just lost a marriage. I had cleared space in my life, in my heart, for something real. Something lasting. Even if it hadn't arrived yet. For the first time in longer than I cared to admit, I started to feel hope. Not the explosive, movie scene kind of hope where everything magically falls into place, but the slow, steady kind. The kind that grows quietly, patiently, like a seed pushing through cracked concrete. One Sunday, after another chaotic family breakfast filled with syrup spills and bad knock-knock jokes, I drove into town and rented a tiny studio apartment above a bakery. The place smelled like fresh bread every morning and had creaky floors that sang under your feet. It wasn't much, a single room, a tiny bathroom, a kitchen barely big enough for a coffee maker and a microwave, but it was mine. Every imperfection, every crack in the walls, every crooked window pane felt more honest than anything I'd had in years. I bought a cheap second-hand couch, a table from a thrift shop, a mattress I dragged up 2 flights of stairs by myself, cursing and laughing the entire way. And for the first night in my new place, I slept on the mattress without sheets, guitar propped against the wall, windows wide open to let the autumn air in. I didn't feel lonely. I felt free. And somewhere deep inside, I knew I wasn't starting over because I had failed. I was starting over because I had finally stopped settling for a life that didn't see me. A life that demanded everything and gave nothing back. One evening, a few months later, I sat at the little kitchen table with a coffee in one hand and my notebook in the other, the same one I started in that dingy motel room. I flipped through the pages, smiling at the clumsy lists and half-formed dreams. Play more guitar. Take a road trip. Try painting even if you suck at it. Talk to strangers without apologizing for existing. Small dreams, maybe, but they were mine. Every messy, beautiful one of them. And as I sipped my coffee, watching the sunset spill gold across the bakery roof below, I realized something else. Some goodbyes aren't endings. They're invitations. Invitations to live a life that isn't built around fear or convenience or someone else's conditions. Invitations to be seen, loved, and celebrated, first by yourself, and then maybe, someday, by someone else who deserves to stand beside you. I wasn't rushing anymore. I wasn't chasing anyone. I was just here, breathing, building, becoming. And for the first time since that rainy night at her parents' dinner table, when a careless phrase shattered everything I thought was solid, I didn't feel broken. I felt alive. And that was more than enough.